Today, we have an accomplished actor joining us. His movie and television credits include productions like RX, The Lost City, The Burning Man, Cold Case, Burn Notice, Across the Hall, Chicago PD, Law and Order SVU, Lucy, Scandal, Braindead, and Gone. He currently plays the ruthless cartel boss Miguel Galindo on FX's Mayans MC. And fans of our podcast will know him as Armadillo Quintaro on The Shield. Danny Pino is here on The Shattered Shield today. Thank you so much for joining me, Danny.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks for having me.
So today I've got some questions about The Shield as well as Mayans. I see a lot of character correlations between Miguel Galindo and Armadillo Quintaro, but always with guests I like to ask them their origin story. So how did you get the role of Armadillo Quintaro on The Shield?
Not easily is the short the short answer. Barbara Fiorentino, Rebecca Mangieri, casting directors who are probably the most influential. Wendy Widener was also on my side. When I first went in to read for Armadillo, I think the producers were not interested, to be honest. And I think Rebecca and Barbara saw something in me that they just weren't willing to quit, and they sent me home with a list of things to maybe look at and reconsider about Armadillo and about what I was bringing into the room. And I went home and I worked on it, which I got to say, I tip my hat to not only Barbara, Rebecca, and Wendy, but also to these producers who can see something, maybe see a potential in an actor and realize that that's what we do. That's what actors do. If you give us a direction, if you give us something to work on, we can be transformative. And they gave me an opportunity. I came back in as Armadillo. People would come in who had seen, met me in my first read and said good morning to me. And I responded as Armadillo would. I came in as him, and I left as him. I gave no margin for thinking that I couldn't play this character. So that's kind of how it happened. And so, they're largely responsible for that.
You came in during the second season of the show, and it had really gotten a lot of critical acclaim. Chiklis won an Emmy for it. And if I'm not mistaken, this was one of the first things you had done as an actor. So how much pressure did you feel coming into a production like that with like an established cast and reputation? And what did you do to adapt to it?
Zero pressure, Andrew. No, I'm kidding. Of course I felt. I mean, it was huge amounts. I mean, even to this day, when I go into a project, I put a lot of pressure on myself. I expect a lot from myself, and so that I think that's a certain amount of motivation and drive to continue to explore and dig deeper into a character and whatnot. But actually, on the day where I went back in to re-audition for Armadillo Quintero, Michael Chiklis walked in with his Emmy to, in a very humble way, to share it with everyone, so that everyone could feel a part of, that achievement, which, I think speaks a lot about him. What he didn't know is that he was setting the bar so high for me, I couldn't help but kind of feel it in my throat. But in true Armadillo fashion, I remained visibly unfazed.
He's a character. I have written down in my question list here. And he's unlike any that you've portrayed before. But I'd say since he's really out there in terms of what he was doing. Where did you draw inspiration for such a vile character? Like, where did you get the cues? The bravado that he brought. Where did you draw from?
Oh man, this was a tough one. I wanted to base Armadillo in someone real. I wanted to have some foundation, some realistic foundation for him, because like what you said, the pitfall with a character like Armadillo is to play an archetype of a villain, to play a stereotype of a villain, And the way that I've found to avoid that is to, take examples from the real world, from, actual people, and try and research them as much as possible, and to walk in their shoes. And so the person who I chose happens to be, a sociopath, a psychopath, which is what I think Armadillo Quintero was, right? In order to do
Right.
what he did, there had to be a significant lack of empathy. And so the person who I studied and lost sleep over was Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with that individual. I've seen actually a lot of with YouTube having interviews available that he did. That is a disturbed man. I can definitely see the similarities there.
Well, and to be specific as to what he was thinking and what motivated him and the way he perceived himself, all of those things came into play when putting on Armadillo.
I'm not sure how much of The Shield you actually watched after you were off it, but one of the most famous scenes came from your tenure, because Armadillo was a really, really smart guy, and they couldn't get him for anything. So Michael Chiklis comes in as Vic, and he's essentially just assaults Armadillo in his house, and he beats him with the book, and he burns his face on the stove. I was curious what your memories were of that scene, like initially reading the script and filming it and whatnot.
Man, that scene, I remember a lot about that scene, actually. I remember that I believe they initially wanted me to be, butt-ass naked when I answered the door. And having just gotten married, I was like, that might be grounds for my wife to divorce me.
Yeah.
And so, to try and be protective of my wife and my marriage, I told John Badham, who was directing, I was like, look, I'm all for my art, and I think that, I want to make the writer's vision, I want to pay respect to the writer's vision, but I think you're going to have to get a body double here. I don't feel comfortable going home and telling my wife, so guess what I did today. Right.
Right.
And so after some debate, and they did have a stunt double there for me, and I think my stunt double was game to do it. They decided to just leave me in those, virtually naked little black Speedo bikini briefs, and have Vic Mackey beat the shit out of me, in those.
Right.
And
I heard that was a Kurt Sutter idea. I was talking to Glenn Mazzara, and he said that we should have this guy in basically as little clothes as possible in a lot of his scenes.
Yeah, Armadillo was constantly undressing, right? Whether he was in the holding cell or whether he was at home. And I didn't quite understand why he would do that either, to be very honest. But I started to understand once I got into the makeup chair, because they had to apply so many scars to Armadillo's body. And for me, playing this man and having to answer the motivation as to why he would do that, right? That was the answer for me. His scars, and what he says to Vic is that every scar is a victory, right?
Yes. That's probably the most profound piece of dialogue he has in the show. I love it.
It's also, it's a threat to anybody else. Look what I've survived. You think you can really come at this? You think you can really take this out?
Yeah.
It'll just be another scar, right? So that was my motivation for him constantly feeling like, in a threatening situation, like a holding cell, which was ultimately his downfall, right?
Yep.
In a holding cell, to make it feel as comfortable and as comfortable for himself and as threatening to others. But, in terms of that scene, I remember there was a shot that John Badham set up, which was, a low low mode, low angle shot after Vic Mackey has fed that legal book to me a few times,
Right.
and now I'm kind of over the couch and on the floor. John Badham set a camera up, kind of. Yeah, I'm pretty sure he had it on the floor, and they had me take a swig of blood and a couple
Oh
of
yes, I remember that shot.
there's maybe a few pieces of wax, of white wax, to kind of make look like teeth, right? And I was a little overzealous in the amount of blood and wax that I put in my mouth, and when I spit it out, I mean, anybody would have died with that amount of blood loss in one spit.
Right.
And I remember everybody at Video Village was like, cut, 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 cut. That was just way too much. I mean, he hit you a couple times in the face, and what you have going on there is like full on internal bleeding. Right. So we had to modify the amount of of blood and teeth, which, I think is a good example of what the Shield was really all about.
Yeah, exactly. Were you surprised by the amount of violence that they had in that scene? Because I mean, to this day, like, it's pretty much one of the roughest things they've done. Like, when you first read that, were you thinking, like, are they really going to do this?
Oh, yeah. No, I knew they were going to do it. I knew from the minute that I signed on that this show was hardcore, and that these writers weren't going to pull any punches, and that this ensemble was not, going to be timid about it either. So I knew what I was signing up for, and I was all for it. I mean, I wanted to go full on, and I know we achieved it because I'm the second of 5 boys. Grew up in Miami, and my brothers are the closest people to me, and to this day, there are 4 dudes in Miami who can't wait to have a crack at Michael Chiklis.
Yeah,
it was so real. It was so real to them. Like, my brothers, they all said my eyes were watering, and I could not wait but to jump through that screen, because it was that visceral.
Let me ask you this. This is kind of a meta question, and there's not like a right or wrong answer, but I'm curious what your thoughts are. Vic is a type of guy who will deal drugs, but thinks he's doing it for the, at least I'm not selling it to kids, and I'm better than people like Armadillo. Do you think a guy like Vic is any better than a guy like Armadillo, or are they really on the same playing field? I struggle with that question still.
That's a really good question, Andrew. And I think what you're tapping into the vein of what I think the show is really asking the viewers to answer, right?
Right.
I think that Vic has some empathy, right? Which is what I think separates him from Armadillo. But also Vic knows better, right? Yeah. I think you can make the argument that Armadillo, is sick mentally, right? So, I think that while I respect the question and I think it's a valid question, it's one that I tend to not want to answer, because I love to put the performance on the screen and allow that to speak for itself and not taint what I think I'm doing, even with my own character. I don't want to have that affect somebody else's experience with the show. So, but I'm very curious as to what you think.
Danny, it's one of those things where it's like, I thought a lot about it because I've been a fan of the show for 15 years, and I came to the conclusion of, I think what Vic does has merits, but the whole purpose of being a cop is to stop that kind of thing from happening, and to let any leeway by is unacceptable. I think he's just as bad as all these other guys, and they really do show, like, even after he grills Armadillo's face, when he walks out of that house, if you remember the shot, like, he looks like, I really think you just actually said it perfectly, like, he knows better. He knows what he's doing is not right. He realizes that and doesn't want to be a part of it. It's almost why he's walking out as quickly as he does out of the house, and people are trying to pull him off. Like, he's becoming what he doesn't want to be. So, in my estimation, I think he's just as bad. Or you could even put it this way: what he does on a day-to-day basis is pushing him further into that zone of people like Armadillo. There is actually a line said by his mentor, Ben Gilroy, where he says, or Vic says, "I'm not like you," and Ben says, "Not yet." But I get why you wouldn't want to answer that. I actually spoke to Jay Carnes not too long ago, and we asked him about
Fantastic
a scene where
actor.
his character.
I
Yeah,
love Jay
yeah.
Carnes, and I got the opportunity to work with him again on SVU.
Yes, yes. When I had asked him about his crying scene, he said the same thing. Like, what he has to say about it isn't any more valid than what anybody else has to say, and it's all up to interpretation. So I understand that, but I thought I would take the shot anyway.
Listen, I'm happy to hear Jay Carnes said that, because that means I'm in good company.
Yeah, yeah.
One of the
He's
things
a
I
good guy.
remember about putting that prosthetic, that grill mark prosthetic,
Uh-huh.
the stovetop on my face, is this is going to be a bitch to shave after this,
Yeah.
which would only, increase Armadillo's level of frustration.
Yeah. He actually has a scene, if you remember, where he describes what it's like after he gets the scar. He talks about the first few days is excruciating, and then it hardens and all that. Do you
Absolutely,
remember
I
that?
remember. Absolutely, that's the same scene where he says every scar is a victory.
Yeah, yeah,
Yep.
yeah. It's good stuff. If you had to pick a takeaway that you got from your experience there, because again, this is pretty early in your career, what would you say that was the most important thing you got from your time on the Shield?
It was so early on in my career. It was all a learning experience. It's
Okay.
it's hard to pick.
Yeah.
It's hard to pick one thing. Well, I'll tell you the first thing that runs through that comes to mind is, I've been playing Armadillo for a few episodes, and then I got the opportunity to play Desi Arnaz,
Uh-huh.
which actually, had me, have to make a decision as to whether to go play Desi, or whether to, finish season 2 off, and I really didn't know what the plans were for Armadillo, and
Right.
I knew being, Cuban American, this biopic about Desi and Lucy was, Desi being one of my icons growing up, for me to go and give, pay homage to Desi was a very strong pull. So when
Yeah.
I made the decision to go play Desi, and I was shooting my final episodes on the Shield, one of those moments where you learn as much about acting as you do about actors and about humanity. And that happened. I was in the makeup chair, getting all of the tattoos and the prosthetic scars taken off. I had said my goodbyes to everyone, including Michael Chiklis. I'd said bye to,
Yeah.
said my goodbyes. And I'm in the makeup chair, and Michael Chiklis comes over again. And he says, "Hey, Pino, I want to say, congratulations on Desi." He said, I had the opportunity of playing John Belushi,
Mm-hmm.
and to play someone who actually lived is a real challenge. And I'll give you some advice, or what you do with it is really up to you. My advice to you is study as much as you can. Just consume as much of Desi's backstory, as many videos, as many episodes, his interviews, whatever it is you can get your hands on, his book. Really absorb all of that before you actually step on stage. And once you step on stage, don't touch any of that stuff again. Just follow your instincts. Know that you've done your homework. Be confident in that who Desi is, and then allow
Right.
your humanity to be on the screen. And I remember getting up from my chair and giving him, a hug and saying, thank you to him. I mean, not only did he give me, something tangible, something to put in my toolbox, something that I could, a map as to how to approach this, which I utilized. But he also showed me that being number one on the call sheet can also mean that you watch out for people, even when they're, a guest star, right? And that, you can, offer kindness, generosity, and a measure of humanity to people who are leaving your show that maybe you'll never see again, and give them an attaboy and a go get them, and the confidence to do so. So, that's one of those moments that I always take with me.
You're really echoing a lot of what I hear. I've heard good stories about Chickless from Jay Carnes, Glenn Mazzara saying that he really encouraged not only the actors but the writers on the show as well. So that's great to hear. That's great to hear. I like hearing stories like that. I was actually recently had just caught up with Mayans because I was of course, I love Kurt Sutter from The Shield, and I remember when Sons premiered, they aired the premiere of Sons right after the finale of The Shield, and followed him through that and came into Mayans. And when I saw that you were in it, I couldn't be any happier. And now that I've watched the first season, I've gotten to see you play Miguel, who, I wanted to say this to you so bad. He reminds me of like what would have happened had Armadillo gotten older and gotten a family and calmed down a little bit, So I'm curious, actually, how did you get the role of Miguel Galindo? Was that, did it have anything to do with and Kurt prior to, or?
I think it had a little bit to do with that. I mean, I think it helped that Kurt and I had, worked together on The Shield. I certainly remember Kurt on set at The Shield, but we hadn't worked together in a very long time, and I'd gone off and played a detective on Cold Case, a homicide detective, and I played, a special victims unit detective on Law and Order. So, I think we needed to get reacquainted. So I was happy to hear that he wanted to see me for this and that he would want to see me read for it. Because quite frankly, I wanted to feel what it would be like to be in his world again. Right. Yeah. And feel what it would be like to play Miguel Galindo, as much for myself as for him, right? To make sure that it was a good fit for both of us. And while I appreciate the parallel between Armadillo Quintero and Miguel Galindo, I think they're very different characters. At least in my head, they're very different characters. Miguel. They share some things in common, in that they're both, highly educated. They're both Mexican, but, and they're both capable of extreme violence. But I think that the parallel or, the similarities kind of end there.
Yeah.
For me, the challenge with Miguel is that, he's not a sociopath. He's not a psychopath. He has plenty of empathy. The things that he does because, for a few reasons, whether it's going to protect his family, right? Whether it is something that is beneficial for his business, whether it's going to protect his friends. So it's, he's got a lot more in the way that I see it, more depth.
Sure, absolutely.
He's more sophisticated. He speaks both Spanish and English, fluently,
and Latin.
And Latin. And something that I really enjoy about Mayans is that virtually 50%, 55% of my dialogue is in Spanish. And so, the authenticity of that is something that Kurt and Elgin, that's a very deliberate thing on their part. And that's something that all the actors on the show embrace. But I love the challenge of Miguel, because you never quite know what he's going to do. Armadillo, in my view, was predictable in his ruthlessness. right?
Yes.
Miguel is unpredictable in that he is, like Kurt wrote, he's playing a chess game on several different boards.
Yes.
So it's that's what I love about it. And so to get Miguel Galindo, to get the thumbs up to play him was a process. Going in and having a clear vision as to who I wanted or who I thought Miguel was, and experimenting with that. Hearing who Kurt thought Miguel was, and finding that synergy. Thankfully, I think Kurt and I were on the same page from the jump. And so it's really been an embarrassment of riches.
Well, see, when I first started watching the first few episodes, I was thinking I saw him do the raincoat thing, and then he had that the food truck vendor and was throwing grease on him, and I was like, oh, here we go again. But then they showed him with his family when he went to go eat dinner at the end of the episode, and I was like, oh, okay, so we're dealing with somebody who does have empathy, because you really wouldn't have a family if you didn't. Well, it's arguable, but that's my opinion. So I wanted to ask, do you find it more difficult to shoot scenes or act scenes for a character like Miguel as opposed to Armadillo because you have that kind of dynamic, or is it really all just something you're used to doing at this point?
I hope I never get used to anything. I think that the minute you get used to something, it just gets stale and flat and boring for yourself and for the audience. Something I remember from The Shield, Scott Brazil, who was a producer and director on The Shield, something he told me in my ear is something I still carry with me, especially in scenes where I think I know what this is already. There's nothing more to be excavated from. And it was a scene, I think, with Jay Carnes, where I'm getting interrogated by Jay and CCH Pounder. And Jay starts to approach me, and he's asking me a question. And I remember Scott cut before we finished the scene. He came over to me, and he whispered in my ear. He said to me something that, probably wouldn't have meant that much to anybody else, but to me, for some reason, and I think it was because he was giving me something to do actively within the scene that I felt too comfortable, because I knew the lines and I knew what was coming, and he was trying to give me something active to play, which is something that, all great directors know how to do in an economical way. And Scott, was that way. And he said to me, pick how you're going to kill this guy. Choose different ways as to what you're going to do to him as he's talking to you, and specifically in what part of his torso you're going to do it. So it all of a sudden elevated the scene to something that wasn't on the page, right? And so that's something that's just an example of what I try and give myself in certain scenes where I feel like I know what this is already, to just make it more complicated and complex, human and maybe, unexpected in terms of the performance.
Well, at this point, you've played. You've mentioned you've played cops like Nick on Law and Order, and you played Scotty on Cold Case, and now you've done Armadillo and Galindo. So, what if you had to choose? What type of character do you prefer to play, and why? Do you prefer to play somebody who's bound by rules and has morals, or somebody who's a little bit loose with what they do?
Andrew, I love the gray area, man.
Okay.
I don't think, I really don't think, a character who, is totally good is worth playing, man. I mean, it would just bore me to tears to watch and to play. Just like a character who is, totally evil,
Right.
you know, Armadillo, I think, is probably the closest to character who I played that was pure evil. You know,
Uh-huh.
you know the saving grace for Armadillo, if there was one for me, was his intelligence. Right, his IQ was something that I found interesting given the dynamics of who he was, but also being able to have, you know, someone in in, uh, in real life to base him on was a challenge, and to a certain extent gave me a touchstone, some guideposts along the way in discovering who Armadillo was. But it's the gray that really attracts me, you know,
Yeah.
because that's really who we are, right?
Right.
We all have a little bit of Vic Mackey in us. We all have a little bit of, you know, whether we admit it or not, we all have a little bit of Armedio Quintero. You know, we have some,
Right.
you know, Miguel Galindo, and it's being able to be honest about that, right? To
Yeah.
to find that place inside of us that is capable of doing the things that these characters do. That's interesting
Right.
for me as an actor, and hopefully for, you know, audiences to watch.
And that's why I love the whole world of the Shield and Suns and Mayans. Like they're if you're looking for an example of real world, I've never found another. I don't know. You can't really call it a franchise, but I've never found a series of shows that have done that as well as they do. And I'm so glad that you're back in it. And I want to wish you luck with season 2, because I heard they greenlit, if you will, season 2.
Well done. I saw what you did there.
And I'm excited to see where Galindo goes, because he's got a lot of plates spinning, and I don't know how that's going to go. But I'd like to thank you for coming on. If you guys want to keep up with Danny, he is at the Danny Pino on Twitter, and of course, Mayan season 2 is coming out. Is there any other project or thing you'd like us to know about?
You know, I got to put on my comedy cap, and I did an episode of One Day at a Time, and that's coming out on Netflix, I believe, in the next month or so. So
I'm real interested to see
be
that.
fun. Yeah,
All right, well,
I won't be torturing anybody on that show, I don't think.
all right. Well, thank you so much, Danny. I appreciate your time.
Hey, Andrew, thank you. And, you know, it's always a pleasure to talk about Kurt and, you know, Emilio Rivera, who I'm back connected to, you know, my brother on the Shield.
Oh yeah.
And to be back in that world is very exciting. And I appreciate your interest.
No problem. Thank you for your time, sir.